You had a question? You can ask.
I still had a question. He says you can ask it now.
Yes, I was wondering if you would elaborate on the matter of the body consciousness, how we can
The question of the body consciousness is of course very important, because most of the modern physical culture systems concentrate on developing the muscles of the body, the strength of the body, but they ignore the side of consciousness in the body. That is understandable, because most of the practitioners do not even have the concept of consciousness. Now the fact is that just as we have a mental consciousness, a consciousness in the heart, a consciousness of the vital, similarly there is a consciousness of the body. Normally the body is lost in its mechanical rounds, and we think the activities of the body are all the functions that we should expect from the body. But behind these activities there is an awareness, a consciousness of its own, and it is possible by being vigilant, by concentration, to become aware of this consciousness. And this consciousness comes into its own when you begin to respond to its signals. Say for instance, when you eat, at a certain stage, however palatable, tasty the food may be, the body does send out a signal, enough. But gourmands that we are, we ignore it and go on with our business. Now that is the time when you have to pause and respond. If you develop the habit of listening to the signals of the body starts sending out more signals, not only in matter of food, in matter of sleep. You wake up fresh. Thereafter, there is no reason except lethargy for you to roll in bed again. Similarly, fatigue, the body does make its fatigue felt. At that time, if you pause for a while, it recoups itself. But we are in a hurry. We think of other engagements to be kept, and we drive the body. Similarly, when we do exercise, when we do asanas, for instance, there must always be a will that this movement must strike at the root of the consciousness in the body. Thereafter, you always you can have a kind of a dialogue with the particular limbs which are being exercised. So this art or technique of awakening the body consciousness, responding to it, is a matter of vigilance, attention and response. Just apart from this body consciousness of the body, you will be interested to know that even when a person is declared clinically dead and the body even starts decomposing, this consciousness of the body, what mother calls the consciousness of the form, does not go. It sticks. It revolves round the body, and if the body is buried, well, it is there. If the body is burnt, it is still there. And it is authentically told that it may take as many as 7 days for the form consciousness to dissolve itself. So this consciousness of the body, if it is awakened, and when it is awakened, it does lot of work for us as the sentinel of our health. It warns when there is danger of accident, danger of illness. It warns when there is a possibility of anything untoward happening, or if somebody is coming whose contact is not very healthy, the body warns by some kind of movement of shrinking or whatever. So that should answer your question.
I was interested to learn how it might be connected with disease, but you did touch on that.
Yeah.
You said that any moment that makes us unhappy or sad, and what makes us cheerful or happy is good. Yet while we practice self-discipline, there are bound to be periods of depression. So I was wondering how we reconcile the discipline with always being happy.
We must distinguish between happiness and pleasure. Pleasure is of the senses, and happiness, Sri Aurobindo describes it in Savitri, his epic. Happiness is the smile on his adorable face. It is a soul movement. But that happiness, it may be to any reason, but it opens the door for the psychic opening. Moralists, religionists may consider the occasion to be sinful, which gives a certain deep happiness to the parties concerned. But that moment of happiness opens the doors, and the psychic does get a chance to come forward. The fourth dimension of perfection is the perfection of the mind. Perfection of our knowledge aspect. I have traced in one of our talks, I hope it has been in this series, of how we begin with the sense mind and gradually it evolves into the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind develops into the thinking mind, the thought mind, and that is where we are at the moment. Our minds are full of restless thoughts. There is a continuous range of thoughts, most of which we delude ourselves into thinking they are ours. But actually, 90% of the thoughts with which we are busy are not our own. We read a lot, we hear, we talk, and all these sink into our consciousness and reappear with our own coloring and pass off to be our thoughts. There is also a thought atmosphere in the universal air. It is full of thoughts from people living and dead. Thoughts, half thoughts, potential thoughts, they are all wheeling about in this subtle atmosphere. And our own mind is a veritable factory of thoughts. And it is a blessing of God that this factory is invisible. Otherwise, if people, our minds were to be transparent, I wonder what would have been the state of this world. Now, this activity covers the whole apparatus of the mind. And we can never say, I will think in my own way. Sri Aurobindo says that we are thought, we don't think. We are lived, we don't live. We have surrendered our initiative to external circumstances. We are content to be driven. And any attempt at mental perfection must be preceded by a serious effort to set our mental house in order. First step towards this end is to become conscious, to become aware of our mental processes. Hold ourselves aloof and watch what goes on in our mind. To become conscious of our mental activities, that's the first step. Second is to regulate, to learn to think what we want to think and refuse to think what we do not want. An order has to be imposed on our mental activity. The next step is to learn to introduce a silence in the mind. The Western approach to this aspect of the question is to treat the mind as a series of mental activities. But the Eastern approach is to treat the mental activities as an imposition on the mind, which is like a reflecting mirror. The mind in the Eastern psychology is treated as a mirror, reflecting our moods, reflecting our desires, reflecting our states of being. So we have to practice whatever discipline appeals to us to bring the mind in focus and silence this restless activity of the mind. This is a hard and a difficult process, but given the will, the persistence and association of those who have achieved that mastery over the mind helps us a good deal in settling a silence. When you are in the company of someone who has achieved that perfection or succeeded in silencing the mind, it communicates itself to those who look for it. That is why in the Eastern tradition, satsang, holy company, is very much cherished. More than learning, more than scholarship, it is the company of the holy which is likened to a log of wood on which there is a fire lighted. Now any small logs or chips thrown in the atmosphere, thrown in the environs, whether they are dry, semi-dry, they get ready. All the time they absorb that heat and warmth and become ready to catch the flame. That is why to sit in company of those who have registered that advance is very helpful. It steals into you and enables you to repeat that victory in yourself. But if such company is not available, well, there are certain places, sacred places, where there is a concentration of these vibrations due to a number of people praying, gathering themselves in a higher consciousness, or a place where developed beings have come and lived. They are called centers of pilgrimage. Maybe a temple, a church, or a sanctified place. It helps. Or to read something inspired, something that transports you above this mundane circle of movements, that links you to something higher. Sri Aurobindo describes in Savitri how a prayer, a king idea, a master act can link man's strength to a transcendent force. Whatever the means you employ, the mind should be taught to slow down and be silent, reasonably silent, when you want it to be silent. Once you develop this art, whenever you want to focus your mind on a problem, everything that is distracting, irrelevant, leaves you, and you can direct the mind as you choose. Once you start silencing the mind, you feel a great peace, a great calm and quietude. Now, the first starts quiet. Quietude is a state where you are quiet, but the first disturbance upsets that quiet. Calm is a more positive state which holds itself to a considerable extent against any impact. But peace is something more solid. It has a kind of liberative element in it, and it makes an impact on the environment. Calm is personal. Peace always communicates itself to the atmosphere. When one silences the mind this way, the shadow of the unknown, of something that transcends the mind, falls on the mind, and there is a sense of aloofness. The mind finds a certain attraction to a kind of negation, a state of negation, rejecting all movement, all expression, and it is tempted to stay in that poise of what you may call static consciousness, without movement, without change. The whole world movement appears to be something very distant, something very far, and only this rock-like consciousness, which is called the self, is experienced to be the dominant reality. It is this mental silence that marks the frontier of the active mind, that has been misinterpreted by many as the ultimate reality. There is a tremendous impact of this consciousness, the consciousness of the self, static self, which casts a spell and detains the aspirant in its zone. However, that is only the first step in this ascension of consciousness. If one refuses to accept this partial truth as the sole truth, then one feels, apart from a descent of peace, a descent of quiet, there is also an impact, a touch of higher faculties, light, knowledge. The experience of each one is different, and the higher levels of the mind above the intellect begin to form themselves. These are called the spiritual heights of the being. They are still mental, but because everything above the thinking mind has been dubbed spiritual, normally these experiences are described as spiritual. In the mind, for instance, our thinking mind, we think in succession. Each thought is followed by another thought. So we move from thought to thought, one after another. A kind of, and the knowledge that we weave on the basis of the hopping mind, hopping thought mind, we call knowledge. It is a precarious and a partial knowledge. But when we go beyond, when after silencing the mind, holding the silence, established in peace, we hold ourselves open, a new activity starts, and that is, thoughts come not one after another, but number of them together. They come in masses, dealing with many subjects, many topics, many themes, many concepts at the same time. This is called by Sri Aurobindo the higher mind. Here, knowledge communicates itself in the form of multiple thoughts. The next higher stage in the ascension of the mind is where knowledge reveals itself not in the form of thoughts, but in the form of illuminations. They are like lightnings, and a series of flashes light up the area of knowledge. This is called the illumined mind. When this action of the higher mind is stabilized, organized, integrated with the working of the lower levels of the mind, and similarly the same integration and stabilization takes place with the illumined mind. The stage is set for still another operation of knowledge, and that is intuition. Now, intuition is the edge of a ray of truth. Its basis is knowledge by identity. Somewhere our being is identified with the object of knowledge, and from there shoots forth a ray, a sharp ray, which gives you instantly the knowledge that you seek. In the life of many, the play of intuition can be seen. It is a glimpse and a promise of what is in store. But very often we tend to dismiss these intuitive flashes as hunches, instincts, or coincidences. Actually, what is intuition on the mental levels is instinct at the vital level. There is a physical instinct, there is a vital instinct. But in the course of evolution, instinct gets transformed and reveals its true nature as intuition. Now, this intuition has 3 or 4 forms. One is you hear the truth. That is called inspiration. Or you see the truth. It is called revelation. You have a spontaneous discrimination between what is right and wrong, what is wrong. That is intuitive discrimination, which comes without your having to analyze, separate and reason out. There is also an intuition of touch. The moment you come into contact physically, you have that knowledge. You want to know the weight of this watch. You just hold it and you immediately feel it is 20 grams. Now I have seen this. Before I come to that, most of us must have seen this kind of intuition in the physical when you want to refer to something in a book or a dictionary. It often happens that when you open the book, the exact page turns up and your eye lights on that entry. We think it is a coincidence. It is not. It is a rare moment when the physical intuits and guides you. My teacher, Kapali Shastri, who was in the ashram and who actually was responsible for taking me there, as though he was a great scholar, a yogin and things of that sort, as part of the ashram discipline, he had undertaken to do some physical activity in what we call the building service, house maintenance service. And there his job was to receive indents from the construction service. Say particular paint, so many grams, so many ounces of this liquid, and he was in charge of paints. He would work there for about 4 hours a day. So he found many times that when he took a spoon and put the paint in that bottle or tin and weigh, it would be exactly the quantity that had been asked for. Once, twice, thrice you could put it to coincidence. But when it started happening regularly, that was intuition in the physical. It happens in with many people, only we don't have the patience or the time to observe things. So this is intuition intuition of touch. It has a special name in Sanskrit called Sanjnana, Sanjnana. In his commentary on the Kena Upanishads, Sri Aurobindo speaks of these various 4 or 5 operations of knowledge. But it is too technical for us at this stage to enter into it. We were speaking of the intuitive mind. Now this of all the operations we have studied, the intuitive mind is the nearest to the source of knowledge. As you pursue the intuitive levels, you come to what is called a global mind, where thoughts, feelings, perspectives, views, they cover the whole globe. They are not individual. The individual is known, but in the context of the global, the universal. The aspect of the many, the multiple, the multiplicity, that is predominant. This is called the overmind, which oversees all objects of knowledge. It is something like a huge bird covering with its wings the entire globe, and it engenders a global vision, global outlook, instead of divisive, piecemeal approach. The overmind knowledge gives the justification for every movement, justifies every thought, every form, every ideology. You condemn none as false, none as wrong, because you see there what was the justifying truth to its existence. It is this overmind consciousness which Sri Aurobindo has in mind when he speaks in one aphorism that his mind, my mind was liberated the moment I realized that the opposite of truth is not a falsehood but another truth. This overmind is also called the universal mind or the cosmic mind. It emphasizes the many, the multiplicity. The unity, the oneness is still in the background. It is this overmind which is described in the Upanishads as the golden lid covering the face of truth. And through the heights of this overmind consciousness, you open yourself to the vibrations and the workings of what is called by Sri Aurobindo the supermind. The Gnostic mind, Gnostic, or the truth mind. Here one gets the full consciousness of the one, unity. You are aware of the many, but as expressions of the one, of unity. If the emphasis of the overmind is on the many, that of the supermind is on the one. And this consciousness of the supermind alone gives us a knowledge free from all possible error. And it is a dynamic knowledge. It is not a knowledge that one knows but is unable to effectuate. The supramental knowledge has its own power and will to organize itself. Another name for the supermind is knowledge-will. And this supermind holds the key to the riddle of our existence. It divinizes our mind and by its power it divinizes our life. It sets aright all the misplacements of consciousness, which we call ignorance, and brings to an end all the disharmonies resulting from ignorance. Those of you who are interested will find detailed descriptions of these different levels of the mind in Life Divine, first volume, the 14th or 15th chapter afterwards, the Supermind as Creator. And this is the content of the perfection of the mind, the perfection of knowledge. I think we shall break now and meet after 15 minutes. Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering about meditation and whether or not the primary purpose of meditation is not the silencing of the mind. Or are there other objects in meditation?
I think we will deal with this question next time. We spoke of fourfold perfection of life and concluded a while ago with the perfection of knowledge, what Mother calls 4 austerities and 4 liberations. This is a scheme not only for perfection of life, but the essential principles underlying their scheme for new education. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have been responsible for a new project in education consisting of physical education, vital education, mental education, psychic education, and spiritual education. The same principles are applied as far as permissible for the education of children, beginning at birth or even before birth, prenatal education, and continuing till about 21. The idea is to lay the foundations of a new society consisting of individuals cultured on these lines. Individual perfection is only one part of Sri Aurobindo's vision. Side by side with individual evolution, he stresses the importance of collective evolution. For an individual can be as perfect as the society in which he lives is perfect. Perfection starts with the individual. But ends with the collectivity. There has to be a simultaneous growth based on an equation of the individual and the collectivity. The question whether the individual is important and the society is intended to feed him and act as a field for his activity, or whether the society is paramount and the individual is only a cell in the body social. Does not arise in this philosophy. Sri Aurobindo restates the ancient Indian perception that both the individual and the collective are two affirmations of the supreme reality which transcends both. The creative divinity affirms itself universally as the collective. Affirms itself individually in the person. Both are interrelated and both derive that sustaining truth from a common transcending reality. This gives a new dimension to the integral philosophy, and in the individual's progress in the later stages of evolution is intimately tied up with the change and progress of the world. Sri Aurobindo is realistic enough to see that a single individual here or another there cannot change the world. So he envisages association of like-minded individuals working on this path associating themselves on different levels forming units centers and groups for furtherance of their common aspiration. A community of seekers adds a special strength to the individual effort. And as a result of this progressive transformation of consciousness, Sri Aurobindo envisages the emergence of a Gnostic society based on principles of unity, mutuality and harmony. Adding one more grade to evolving humanity. He discusses this question at length in the last two chapters of the Life Divine, entitled The Gnostic Society and Divine Life. The pattern that is emerging in the world today seems to indicate the emergence of a number of communities consisting of individuals who have felt the compulsive need to adopt a different pattern of living than the existing common one. And they aim to provide an environment for the growth of a new consciousness. But such experiments can succeed only if there is a change or an attempt to change individual consciousness. That is, on a spiritual basis. Of freedom plasticity and a growth into universal consciousness. If these communities of which there are many in the United States become cult ridden, get infected with the disease of elitism, and try to restructure life on the externals, instead of altering the pattern of inner functioning. They will repeat the old world fiasco. The formation of the right type of communities or groups called islets by Sri Aurobindo, ISLETS, and their coordination into larger articulations of the new consciousness has to precede the advent of the new age. Now I am open to questions.
The issue of avoiding elitism and cultism seems like one of the most difficult ones for groups as well as individuals. And it seems as though having a central goal and ideal often circles it around a particular teacher or teaching or personality, and that this is somehow, in addition to attracting the sincere idealism of the followers, attracts their ego. Can you say something about the proper attitude to that situation and the proper attitude of groups to other groups that seem to be behaving in that way?
Yeah, we are steadily moving into an age of leaderless groups. The age of leaders is over. There is a shift towards decentralization in all the spheres of life. And this makes communities or groups attach greater importance to the teaching, to the principles, than to the personalities who have proclaimed those principles. The age of my teacher, my philosophy, my religion, that also is over. The time spirit is that of the universal person. And the earlier we tune ourselves to that, the better. Each path has its relevance to some. All are not in the same stage of evolution. That is why different individuals need different teachings relevant to their stage. A mutual tolerance, acceptance of the bona fides of each other, and support in areas which do not conflict is the way for similar communities to thrive and add weight in the cosmic balance. Mother used to say that of all the egos, the spiritual ego is the most difficult to overcome. It has been the bane of many communities. And it is time we learn to overpass this ego.
I have some questions about this. It seems like this is a very timid approach to the problems that face the world. I mean, no ego, no leadership, no fundamental changing of the problems we have in raising children, in ownership of property, in the exploitation, the various oppressions. There's no attention given to any of these questions, and yet are we to assume that they're simply going to straighten themselves out and suddenly people will have this realization in spirituality? I think that it just seems natural that the vacuum is going to be filled by some sort of leadership someplace, and it certainly is not going to be in a passive kind of approach like this. There are lots of experimenting now. People are trying. There's a lot of goodwill in these communities where people are trying to be living in a different way, more idealistic. They're trying lots of new things, and it's very exciting. And I find very little excitement about this. It's more just sitting and waiting and being passive. And I'm afraid that before this descent comes, this reality here is going to be burnt up in an atomic cinder because nothing was done.
I too am amused. It is only, when one starts living and practicing this life, that the perspective changes and things begin to appear in a different light than what you spoke of. If you will pardon me, since you have been frank enough, I too should take the liberty of being frank, that yours is a typical old world approach which will not find acceptance in the younger generation, that is to lead the world tomorrow. They will not accept leadership. They don't think that fighting with things is the way to cure them. And to bring about a work and bring about a change in oneself is the greatest challenge that one can have. To try to change the society is not that difficult, economically, politically, socially. But to change your consciousness is the hardest job. And to think that it is timid, I think that's not right. You try to curb and control one quality of yours which is causing disharmony, and you will see how difficult it is. It is only those of strong metal that can attempt and succeed. So it is a question of practice. Of course, every individual is free to accept or not to accept.
Let me comment briefly what my experience has been in that realm. Is I have a deep appreciation for the differences that passive and active approach. I'm convinced that the more we get in touch with our own consciousness, the more passive we become. The more stronger we become in developing our will in that regard. The more active we can become. The stronger we are in asserting our will in the public regard towards others. So we have in a new generation a much stronger tendency to become passive, to become more conscious of our own will. And it is precisely in that generation you will find a much stronger will on an active regard. But if you exert your will in an active sense, where you've conquered that ability in itself, it will be effective.
A couple of comments. One is that I was very struck by this, the committee that received the Nobel Peace Prize for help with refugees.
Yeah.
That it was a committee, it wasn't one person. And
Yes.
also that they have worked in an active way towards a constructive goal without singling out enemies or attacking anyone.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's an
Yeah.
example.
It is indicative.
I'm also struck by the last emotional interchange. You were disturbed with Sri Pandit's position on the Gita, which allowed for killing and fighting, which is very active. And now you're disturbed that he's being too passive.
I think active in a positive way is very good. I don't think fighting is a very intelligent way to be active. In fact, fighting today with atomic arms is downright dangerous and insanity.
Yeah,
I'm
Active in
100%
change and solid, good social change, I think is needed.
I'm 100% behind fighting. I'm training my sons in the martial arts. And I hope they learn that there's a time to fight and a time to advance in fighting. And I would 100% endorse the kind of fighting that's necessary for that which we take a stand on.
I read something in the Human Cycle of Aurobindo mentions the liberty and fraternity and equality. I think he said something about the equality is still trying to now. I wondered if part of this consciousness emerging individuals and the leaders being less important is some attempt at
It is.
equality that has some consciousness in it. Not an anthill, but some equality that has some basis, perhaps.
As you were discussing the leaderless society, I kept wondering if in some ways this is an external manifestation of the integral yoga in the sense that what is being put aside here is a thinking intellectual approach to solving all problems, so that the external society becomes a manifestation of our own leaderless psyche, so to speak.
Yeah.
It didn't sound like there was, from my reading of this, a lack of real leadership. It seemed to, in an earlier discussion, you talked about individual centers and responsibility of life, and it seems that it's more of of bringing out the individuality of people, and having people really express that and live that, not to the exclusion of anybody else, and maintaining that sensitivity.
Each individual finds the leader within.
In practice, in many communities, though, isn't there the sort of a rotation in the leadership or a fluidity of leadership?
There is a collective leadership with on a rotational basis. Collective, but each person occupies the position, given scope to occupy the position rotationally, so that each one has an appreciation of the difficulties involved and a better understanding and commonality is built up. And that is the trend, to have a directorate without chairman. In some of the advanced communities, they have committees but no chairman. There can be conveners, there can be coordinators, there must be focalizers, but no boss. And that focalizer or a coordinator, that also is rotational. 1 month yourself, 1 month another person. So no vested interests spring up.
In the work that was done in group work by someone named Will Schutz, there was the emphasis on individuals moving into leadership based upon the situation and based upon their individual talent and in meeting the crisis of the situation.
This is a leadership in a functional sense rather than a personal charismatic.
Yes.
A man I know who practices in a Zen community here in the Bay Area was describing to me his experience of being, I don't know the title in Japanese, but he was in charge of making sure everyone else kept to their Zen practice and speaking to people who were missing sittings. And at another point in time, he was in a position of being a gardener and taking orders from some of the same people who he's been in a superior role to authority. And part of the practice in this community was to fully accept the role you're in, to fully accept being a leader when you're a leader and accept the responsibility and the authority, and then to fully accept being in a subservient role. I was impressed with the flexibility that's developed.
Does not the assumption of placing society as leaderless mean that there is an integration of personal willingness to evolve and grow without the dependency on looking for guides and leaders?
Exactly. That's the principle. Otherwise, one chooses the easier path of following somebody. One doesn't do homework, one doesn't work upon oneself. One is content. I think we should stop. I have to leave early in the morning for some other place.